Non-Traditional Employment for Women, or NEW, and I'm also the board chair of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. This morning, as you see, we have the pleasure of sitting down with Scott Stringer for the fourth of our scheduled conversations with the publicly announced candidates. Thank you to the members and partners who have joined us from nearly 100 organizations to hear from the candidate. The New York City Employment and Training Coalition supports the workforce development community to ensure that every New Yorker has access to the skills, training, and education needed to thrive in the local economy, and that every business is able to maintain a highly skilled workforce. NYCETC's membership is comprised of nearly 180 workforce providers, educational institutions, and labor management organizations that provide job training and employment services to over 500,000 New Yorkers, making us the largest city-based workforce development coalition in the country. Thank you again for being with us this morning, and I'll now hand it over to our Executive Director, Jose Ortiz Jr., to begin the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jose Ortiz Jr., and I'm the Executive Director of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. Before we get started, all participants should know that you'll be muted for the duration of this call. The controller will be provided an opportunity to talk about his candidacy and answer some questions in a fireside format. We'll then open it up for a few questions from several members and partners. Please type in your questions along with your name, title, and organization throughout the conversation using the chat icon located on the bottom panel. If you're called upon to ask your question, we will unmute you so that you may ask your question yourself directly to our presenter. Please note that we'll try our best to get to as many questions as time will allow. I want to thank Mr. Stringer for his leadership and for being here with us this morning. For some background on the controller, Scott Stringer was born and raised in Washington Heights and is a lifelong New Yorker. He's a graduate of John F. Kennedy High School and John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He's worked in public service for his entire career, serving in the New York State Assembly for 13 years and as Manhattan Borough President from 2006 to 2013, before he was elected to his current position as New York City Comptroller. Throughout his career, Mr. Stringer has been a champion for tenants and a leading progressive voice on issues ranging from LGBTQ rights to healthcare to protecting a woman's right to choose. In office, he has worked on a wide variety of issues, including affordable housing, the $15 minimum wage increase, government reform, and ending fracking in New York State. In September, he launched his campaign to run for mayor of New York City in the 2021 mayoral election. Mr. Stringer, welcome. It's nice to see you again. Thanks for being here with us.
Great to be here.
I want to begin by allowing you to introduce yourself to the community officially and tell us a little bit about yourself, including the work as a public servant and as controller.
So, well, let me just say to all of you, it's really great for you to give me this opportunity to be here before you. I've worked with so many of you in my role as controller over the last 7 years, so to come back now as a candidate for mayor is definitely a change of pace, but I'm really glad to have this discussion. Look, I'm a kid who grew up in Washington Heights back in the 1970s. It was a time that I still think about a lot. It was a time when there were 2,000 murders a year. Where I was growing up, nobody was investing in our community. In fact, people were giving up and throwing up their hands in northern Manhattan and basically leaving town because of the fiscal crisis and the lack of governing in this city. And for me, what always stayed true over my life has always been this notion that while people have fled New York in times of crisis, I love the pioneers who actually stayed and brought our city back to life, whether it was in the 70s when we were on the edge of bankruptcy, whether it was after 9/11, when it was during the fiscal meltdown in 2008 or Hurricane Sandy, the pioneers and the people of this city always bring us back bigger and stronger than ever. So I'm running for mayor because I want to use my expertise, the financial management I brought to bear in the controller's office, my activism work as borough president, my independence in the state assembly. You bring all that to the table in a new city hall that will be committed to governing and bringing back this city is an enormous challenge and something I feel very strongly about as a lifelong New Yorker. And on a personal side, you know, I've got skin in this game and it means a lot to me. I have two little kids, even though I got married late in life. I have an 8-year-old and a 7-year-old, Max and Miles, my two M&Ms. They're public school kids. I think about the kind of city that I want them to grow up in. I want them to have the diversity and the ability to be anything they want. So I'm going to work every day, not just for my kids, but the 100,000 kids who are in homeless shelters, the kids who don't have a voice. We are all in this for them, and I'm very glad to be here with all of you.
Thank you for that answer. It was really helpful in terms of just giving us a depiction of who you are and why you've taken these next steps. In terms of our next question, over the last 8 months, the world has changed dramatically, as you know, including specifically in our city, and it's changed in ways that we hadn't originally foreseen. Through May, over 1.25 million New Yorkers have faced unemployment, steep economic insecurity. Nearly 900,000 private sector and government jobs are lost, and 330,000 independent contractors filed for unemployment assistance. The city's unemployment rate now stands just over 16%, with marginalized communities facing the highest rates of displacement and many under or unemployed New Yorkers, such as gig workers, not being counted. How have your priorities changed as a result of COVID-19, as well as the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, the world has changed, and just to give some more focus on what you're saying, is that think about February 2020. The unemployment rate in the city was 3.4%. We were really at the lowest unemployment in the history of the city, including in communities of color. We went from 3.4% in February to within the few months up to the 20% you're talking about. We think about over the last 10 years, the fact that the city added 1 million jobs to this economy. In the last 10 years, once COVID hit, within 30 days, we lost 970,000 jobs. 75% of those jobs impacted the front lines of our business communities. When you think about small business, you're also looking at 520,000 lost jobs in businesses that employed less than 50 people per business. We're in an economic crisis. And yes, this mayoral race has changed because we have to reopen and rethink our economy in a way we never had to in our lifetime. And I would just say that we cannot open this economy the same way we closed it. We have to address the systemic inequality in our communities. We have to drill down to recognize that government has not been about treating our neighborhoods equally. And that came to me in a very stark, cruel way when my mom died of COVID in a Bronx hospital. And I was trying to rationalize her COVID death with her age and her pre-existing condition, a woman in her 80s, a proud woman in her 80s. And the conversation I had with the doctor was about recognizing that people her age were not dying in the Bronx. It was Black people who had type 2 diabetes and Latino people who had pre-existing health conditions that government managed but never solved. And so we cannot continue the status quo. COVID showed us the dark side of inequality, the dangerous side of not tending to all the zip codes in the city. And that's the mayoralty that has to finally come to terms with the fact that yes, we're a tale of two cities, but in the last 7 years, we added more chapters to the tale of two cities. We didn't lead the fight on inequality and social justice. And the protests and Black Lives Matter has made it very clear that in addition to economic justice, we also have to rethink the way we over-police our Black and brown communities. And we need a mayor who's going to be strong with the police department, appoint a commissioner that is aligned with my vision and thinking on these issues, because no longer can we use police as the vehicle for justice in our communities. One thing that has struck me about the policing issue is that basically 40% of the calls that come into 911 are not for crimes in progress. Someone may have a mental illness issue on the street. Someone may have a social issue that requires a different kind of response. A car alarm may go off, and yet we don't need to over-police. So I want to restructure this department to create an equal justice system. That is what I've been doing as controller and as borough president. One last thought about that, so you know my record. I did get arrested for civil disobedience during the Diallo protests 20 years ago. I was there, and I did my part. And 10 years ago, I stood up as someone who looked like me and said, enough would stop at question and frisk. And today we have a new challenge. And based on the coalition building that I can do, the record that I have, I'm the one who I think can issue the kind of reforms that align Black Lives Matter, aligns the social injustice in the budget, and create a new city hall with a problem-solving agenda on these issues. I can't wait to get started.
Thank you. For our next question, move on to a report that we did over the summer called Recovery for All. And this was done in collaboration with a number of leaders across the public and private sectors, including human service organizations, labor unions, educational institutions, small and large businesses, think tanks, et cetera. And amongst that, in that report, it was really centered on small business and workforce development for displaced workers in marginalized communities. Are there any recommendations that stood out to you or that align with your vision for post-COVID recovery?
First, I think your report was excellent and got right to the challenge that we face. A lot of the jobs that we thought were going to be here probably are not coming back. We need to rethink the kind of training that the next generation and existing workers are going to need to get back into the workforce. We need to upskill so many of our workers, especially in the new jobs and telehealth and other technology jobs. This is an opportunity to drill down on this when we think about the new economy. I just offered a plan based on the work that you did. So I want to say that I view it as a real collaboration to talk about how we can institute a workforce training at CUNY, because I do think the community colleges are a great place to start. We've got to make sure that we spend the $160 million to make tuition free at the community colleges and then bring in a workforce development plan with all of you. But also, the mayor has got to lead on this issue and make it easier for nonprofits in this space to function. I don't have to tell all of you that you spent more time trying to navigate the bureaucracy of city agencies than actually be able to do the forward-thinking work that your report speaks about. So the mayor has got to consolidate the 12 different agencies that deal with workforce development, create one real agency that's actually going to navigate the bureaucracy, build relationships with CUNY, look at programs like ASAP and other ways to engage kids into the training system. And look, it's not that complicated. We can create, stacked programs and upskill programs that are measured by the work that the kids have to, the younger people have to do to meet their schedules and their needs and give them the resources to be successful. The workforce development component to the recovery is essential if we're going to rebuild our city the way we want it to be rebuilt and come out of the pandemic stronger than ever.
Yeah, you referenced the report, and thank you for referencing, obviously, the impact of our report on your thinking, which is exciting. But you referenced your report that you just unveiled yesterday, and sped ahead to the next question. But I'm glad you were able to raise it. You talked about, in it, you proposed tuition at CUNY colleges, community colleges especially, expansion of certified apprenticeships, and you also talked about the expansion of bridge programs. Were there other things that you wanted to elaborate about within that particular report and how that impacts your plans in the next administration?
Well, a lot of the proposal on workforce development is about fully empowering our not-for-profits, and something that we have to come to terms with in city government. And this may be a big shock to many bureaucrats, but here's the truth. The nonprofit community does direct services for kids, for seniors. All of you are on the front lines. You're frontline workers when you deal with the most vulnerable in our society. And what the city government has done is create barriers to your success. And we've got to stop that bureaucracy now. Delayed payments, a lack of certainty in terms of whether you will even have continued funding is all ways to just stop the important work that you're doing. So again, we've got to create a new dynamic with city agencies, City Hall, and our not-for-profits. Many of you know that I have been leading this fight with you for many, many years. I'm not a stranger to this. I have taken on the de Blasio administration on these issues, exposed the lack of management when it comes to nonprofits and funding. I'm going to stop that, Jose, on day one and create a system that we can all survive in. And why do we want to do this? Well, yes, we care about direct services and our vulnerable people, but let's also put it out there. The nonprofit workforce, the nonprofits that we have, generate $77 billion in this economy, employ 600,000 people. 18% of the private workforce comes out of our not-for-profits. So the more successful you are, the better the city will be economically. So here we have nonprofits who have proven their ability to manage some of the most difficult challenges in our communities. Second, you are an economic powerhouse when you think about the totality of the nonprofit community. And third, why can't this government recognize your worth and your challenges, especially for nonprofits that don't have great resources, who, if they don't get funding on time and on budget, they are most likely to go under and take vulnerable communities with them. It's time to stop this once and for all, Jose.
Thank you. What this particular period of time is really made, I think, more pressing is the opportunity of inclusion, or making our plans here in the city about inclusivity and inclusive growth. So tell us a little bit more about your plans to make the city more inclusive. And when answering that, consider the role that workforce development plays, the biggest challenges that New York City workers and job seekers today are facing and in the coming decade, and what policies and programs could we enact to address them?
I think we need a full workforce development plan. That's why I issued some of my ideas the other day. Talk is cheap, and I can tell you how important being inclusive is and how important it is for all of us to think about these issues. But if you don't have a plan for City Hall come January 22, in the midst of an economic recovery, and we don't put a real workforce development plan in place, the ideas that you talked about, the idea that we're promoting, trying to link CUNY with the not-for-profits and job training, then what we're going to have is a workforce that can't get employed in the emerging jobs that will be here. Some jobs simply are not coming back, but other jobs will. So this is the time to look and rethink training programs to gear that training to the jobs that will be here. I mentioned telehealth as an example. These are jobs that with some retraining, we can actually employ people, and they don't need to have graduate degrees. You can come in with certifications and different qualifications based on your training and get a job and get back into the workforce. As you mentioned, in communities of color, the unemployment rate, 1 out of 4 people are unemployed. But we have to do the analysis and the work to say, okay, of the people who are unemployed, how many can go back into retail if the stores aren't open? How many people can work in food and beverage if all the businesses aren't open? Okay, then those that can't go back into those industries, what can they do? Well, they can go to a community college tuition free and start getting the training in a job that they want and a career that they never thought about. So I view this, even in this very difficult financial time, as a real opportunity to work with all the nonprofits that do this work and create one center home in City Hall, a workforce development agency that does not bounce people around to 12 different agencies, but consolidates services and programs and new ideas to deal with this. I believe that my government experience, the fact that I've audited every agency in the city, the fact that I've been able to root out so much of the bureaucracy and incompetence, makes me qualified to bring into government the best and the brightest who are going to be able to tackle these issues for real. I think, Jose, people are tired of speechifying. Talk is cheap when you don't have a job and you can't feed your family and you can't pay the rent. We need specific ideas, whether it's on workforce development or my 25-point plan on how to rethink our small businesses and how we can deal with our vacant commercial corridors. This is what people need to get back into the workforce.
Thank you. So you're the mayor of New York City. We're a year out from the next election, and you've been elected. What do you expect priorities to be during the first 100 days?
First of all, Jose, thank you for your confidence in me. It's because we work together, and don't think I won't tell everyone you said that. Look, so I have a lot of plans for the first 100 days, but for the purpose of this conversation, I want to be able on day one to initiate the specific plan on workforce development I outlined just yesterday. And I want to do that incorporating the ideas that the not-for-profits that you've articulated, because a lot of our work has, we've commingled our work in your work, right? I'm the first one to say it's your ideas in the nonprofit community that must be realized in City Hall. So I've mentioned a couple of times, we do need to change how we do business at City Hall. We have to align our goals with one agency and no more bureaucracy. So from a City Hall perspective, I'm going to come back to one agency, not 12 agencies that deal with workforce development. I'll do that in the first 100 days. The second thing I'm going to do is create a mayor's office of contracts, MOCs, that is actually going to be proactive, helping not-for-profits, not hurting not-for-profits. I'll initiate a plan to make sure, just like in the controller's office, when I have 30 days to review contracts and we approve them 90-some-odd% of the time, I'm going to hold every one of our commissioners and agencies to the same timeline, because delay is the death knell of nonprofits. And also, as our budgets get better and stronger, we also have to look at how nonprofits are funded, and it has to be with a better revenue stream. We have to look at issues like fringe and other payments, because I am very, very convinced that a strong not-for-profit system is the only way we're really going to create measures to help the most vulnerable in this city. Imagine if the mayor wisely brought all of the not-for-profits together on school openings and how we could deal with our kids in a real, robust, meaningful way for public discussion. Imagine the ideas that would have been generated. Perhaps not-for-profits would have said, give us outdoor space. We're going to work with the teachers union and others and give supportive services, help us design programs. I think our not-for-profits are the best frontline workers to deal with some of these issues. And I do think we need to have that start at City Hall. So my first 100 days is going to address these issues, and I can get this thing up and running in a way we haven't seen in the last 7 years.
Thank you. A couple other points that I just wanted to raise in relation to that. And this is, historically has been, an issue within the workforce development sector, but has increasingly become so as a result of COVID and just really, over the last few months. Broadband access, childcare, these are really pressing concerns for populations within our community. And we talked about it in a report that we issued sometime in the spring about how 13% or 70,000 folks that we serve under our membership still remaining disconnected because they lack broadband or lack the necessary hardware to access the internet. There's huge numbers in research right now around the inability for women to effectively be able to support their household and at the same time work, given the nature of the crisis and them stepping in to take care of their families, but also being full-time working parents. So I ask you that in terms of looking also towards the next, your first 100 days, have you given any thought to where these pieces fit into your plans?
January 2022, now that you've thought I'm going to be mayor, the first thing that we're going to do that doesn't have to do with our not-for-profits is also begin implementation of our NYC Under 3 plan, essentially universal childcare for everybody who can't afford it. We have a ramp-up provision. We have money to close the childcare deserts that I identified over the last couple of years. The program that we released speaks to tripling the number of kids that can access childcare. We know the facts now. It's not just getting people back in the workforce, but under my plan, 20,000 women, mostly women of color, would go back to the workforce, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue. But right now, 0 to 3 childcare programs will help the kids who need the brain development, because the fact is 80% of brain development is 0 to 3. And Bill de Blasio proved to me that a mayor can think big and do big in this space, especially when he implemented pre-K within a year. I give him great credit. It's his signature issue, and he showed what happens when you mobilize an administration around a goal. And I'm going to give him great credit, even though I've been a great critic on this issue. So now let's double down. Let's create NYC Under 3, which is my plan to triple the number of kids in childcare. Let's come up with a plan that not only closes childcare deserts in communities, closes the economic gap so poor people can access health childcare No one really, except if you're very wealthy, can afford the $21,000 a year. And then let's put money, capital money in place to begin to build out that healthcare system, that child care system. I'm a little bit ahead of the curve because thanks to Senator Jessica Ramos, thanks to Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, thanks to Yulee New and so many others in the Assembly, the Ramos bill in Albany would raise the payroll taxes to fund this program. And we're going to get that done as a signature issue the day I'm elected. The mayor was able to do that with pre-K, and I'm going to do it with childcare and 0 to 3.
Thank you. So we're now going to move on to questions from our audience and a few of our members and partners. We're going to start by inviting Wayne Ho, who is the president and CEO of the Chinese American Planning Council and is also our newest NYCETC board member, to ask the first question. Wayne, feel free to go ahead when you're ready. Wayne, are you there? Looks like we may, there you are.
It's a delay on Zoom. Controller, good to see you again. Hope you're doing well.
How you doing?
Good, good. You've answered my initial questions talking about some of the stuff you would do for the nonprofit sector. So I just want to put a pin on some things. As you know, we have chronically low wages in our sector. As you know, we all struggled with trying to get PPE and other supports during the pandemic. So what would be your plans to support the workers of human services nonprofits if you were to become mayor?
Look, I've stood as the only mayoral candidate, I believe, who stood on the steps of City Hall and said to the mayor and the council, fund nonprofits, pay for the things that no one wants to pay for. You know, I'm sure all of you would appreciate that if you have a donor or you have a set of dollars, a lot of those dollars never seem to go to staff and to fringe and to benefits because everyone wants to see their name on the door, including politicians. They want to do the big ribbon cutting for the big project, but the back office seems to get lost in the shuffle. And that's why I came out as controller during the recent budget fight and the pre-COVID fight and said, look, we've got to invest in the people who are doing the frontline work. And we have the money in the budget and we have to do that. And I like to think that our analysis and our work on this space made it easier for you to get the resources you needed. As mayor, I'm in a position to understand this because I've done the analysis, I've crunched the numbers, I've looked at the agencies, and I know the connection between resources for workers, a livable wage, an economic opportunity to make the nonprofit journey a career that also takes care of their families is critical to maintaining service delivery in the city. I'm always amazed that when you go to a child care center, and I've gone with Senator Ramos and so many others as we fight for more child care, to listen to the workers, to talk about the fact that they take care of our children, for example, with love and care, and they get paid so little that when they go home, they can't take care of their own children. They can't pay their own rent. Yet we ask so many in this space to take care of our elderly parents, our little children, and we never really think what happens after 5 o'clock to the frontline not-for-profit workers, and what about their families? And I think that's ridiculous. And I don't think that sustains the nonprofit industry or any industry. And we're gonna have to prioritize our budget. And it goes to what I talked about earlier. We can't open the economy the same way we closed it. We have to start looking at where we have vulnerable points and correct it. And the way we do it is by looking at our stimulus package in a Biden presidency, but we also have to look at raising revenue. People who've done well in the city should be asked to pay more so that we can have the grand bargain of investing in our neighborhoods. Whether you care about cleaning up the streets that are littered right now, whether you worry about quality of life, or whether you worry about the future of our communities that have been victimized by systemic racism, the way to change that is to reinvest in our new priorities. And that's what I'm going to do as mayor of New York City. Welcome back.
Thank you. And thank you to Wayne for the question. Our next question comes from Deborah Means. Deborah is the Director of Network and Resource Development for Global Talent Bridge at World Education Services. Deborah, are you there?
I think I was muted. Yes, I am. Hi, thank you.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to ask a question. And also just thank you for being able to provide this opportunity for us to hear in your words the ways in which you're looking at addressing some of the workforce needs here in New York City. So the question that I'd specifically like to ask you is one that centers on the internationally educated immigrant population. We know that in the United States, there's more than 2 million immigrants and refugees with at least a bachelor's degree that are unemployed or underemployed. And when we look at the numbers here in New York City, we know that roughly over 100,000 or approximately about 33% are also victims of what we call brain waste, which is where you might jump in a taxi cab to go from your meeting downtown to uptown. You strike up a conversation, you find out that the person that's transporting you is a person that previously was a foreign or an international medical graduate or a doctor that now is driving a taxi cab. We hear from immigrants themselves, we hear from program providers that we have a workforce system that does not always accommodate the unique needs of this population, such as the need for contextualized professional ESL instruction, bridge programming, which I love the fact that I heard you reference that, but we know that bridge programming for immigrant professionals looks different. It may only require some additional advanced level course credits rather than having to redo as the only option a full degree program in order to achieve employment in their field. And so recognizing the potential economic contributions for New York City's immigrant communities and their ability to fill some of the critical gaps that exist with the right interventions, I'm wondering if you can just tell us how you would work to ensure that a workforce system in New York City could appropriately address the needs of the immigrants with international experience and education.
First of all, I think that is an amazing series of points you made, because we have the greatest talent pool of immigrants who are in the city, and we seem to just ignore that fact. And yes, you're right, we meet them in low-wage jobs or unskilled jobs when they should be elevated. You know, one of the roles I think I've tried to play as controller when Donald Trump has waged war on our immigrants, both in New York City and around the country, when ICE has literally just lifted innocent people out of homes and away from children, I've countered by talking about the economic power of immigrants in the city, the fact that immigrants pay billions of dollars in taxes, the fact that immigrants are in all aspects of our industries, whether it's entertainment, medicine, and the like. But there are, of the million people unemployed, there are 250,000 low-wage workers, many who are immigrants, who need that opportunity to come into the workforce with training and with new ways of being able to access the jobs that are going to be here, especially in technology and, you know, in health and the things we talked about this morning. And so I'm very committed to this. And let me say that I would love to work with you to develop programs in this space, because it is an untapped resource. It's also the morally right thing to do. And in a time when we're going to need more people on the front lines, whether it's teachers, whether it's medical assistants, whether it's just a new way of thinking about industry, we should not ignore the power of immigrants in this city that are here right now, ready to go.
Hi, trying to unmute myself. It's on me to ask a couple of questions that we've received from our membership in advance, but unfortunately some of them couldn't be on today, so I'll be asking for them. So the first question comes from Susan Skier, Executive Director of the Institute for Career Development. And so her question comes with a little bit of context. In New York City, the unemployment rate for individuals with disabilities was 2.5 times the rate for individuals without disabilities before COVID, meaning that the decade-long economic expansion left far too many folks in this community behind. There's a lot of discussion now about rebuilding a more just, inclusive economy post-COVID, but traditionally the workforce development system has not embraced employment for individuals with disabilities as a priority. As you know, the COVID-19 epidemic has disproportionately impacted people of color and left many individuals with lasting physical and mental health issues. Faced with the reality that we will have more individuals with disabilities in need of job training and placement, we specifically target closing the employment gap for individuals with disabilities as a key component of rebuilding a more equitable economy. And if so, what types of policies and programs would you put in place to achieve that goal?
Well, I want to thank Susan for that question. I had the privilege of working with Susan when I became controller. Susan was in the controller's office and spent a lot of time working on a lot of our policies as it relates to people with disabilities. And I know she's making a good contribution. So hello, Susan. I think the city has to lead by example. I think we do need a program. I think the federal government has a goal of 7% of hiring of people with disabilities. You think that's low, but given the huge unemployment, I do think the city should have aspirational goals for employment in every city agency and incorporate people in our training and recovery plan. And I, as somebody who's worked for many, many years with people with disabilities, when I was in the assembly, I chaired the task force on people with disabilities and broke new ground legislatively. It's just amazing how much more work we have to do. The next frontier is on jobs and economic development. There's always been a huge, huge gap in unemployment for people with disabilities, and yet they absolutely can be part of the workforce if we prioritize them as human beings and also as skilled workers. So I'm very committed to this. I will work to incorporate any empowerment training issues to incorporate people who are in this space. If the federal government can have goals, I can't imagine why our city can't be more proactive in this area, and I'll do it.
Thank you. And the next question I have is, and I forgot to introduce myself, my name is Annie Garniva. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Special Initiatives at the Coalition. And so this question comes both from some members as well as very near and dear to my heart relative to the issue of climate change and resiliency. Of course, this is one of the main crises that we face. And so I'd like to know how you will connect both workforce and economic development to both resolve some of the climate change issues as well as tap into the opportunity that provides us in building out sustainable and resilient careers that are also rooted in solving one of the major more apocalyptic crises that we face.
Well, let me first say that I share your concern about climate change. I think we have a window of less than a decade to put in place programs and reverse course on climate change in the city. Part of my platform as mayor is going to be about climate issues, but the best way you know where I stand is to just take a second and look at the work I've done as controller. I have doubled the amount of investments that we make in the green economy. We're up to $4 billion in new investments. Second, I am in the process working with our labor trustees and elected officials. We are going through a divestment strategy for our pension fund, which is the fourth largest pension fund in the United States, $200 billion strong. And our divestment could literally change the course of history, not just in New York City and around, and but around the country and hopefully around the world. And I'm usually not someone who gets excited and dramatic like that, but I'm putting that marker down because we're doing the hard work to do it. But we don't have to stop there. We have to create create models to reduce pollution, especially in communities of color. There's no reason why we should have pipelines running through many of our neighborhoods promoting fracked gas when we need to have electricity and batteries and a whole different way of thinking. So I would get rid of the peaker plants. I'm the elected official who came out against them. They're a model of a pollution past, and that's not right. We also have to retrofit our buildings, which is going to create the green jobs that are so prevalent, and that's where the nexus between the green economy and job training comes into play, because we really have an opportunity to create a new green economy that also speaks to these issues. And finally, I just want to throw out another idea that I was not able to get done with the de Blasio administration. I think when we issue bonds, we should have green bonds because there's such a demand for investment in the capital budget on green initiatives. We should create a green bond initiative as well. The mayor wouldn't do it, too much work. I will do it with the next controller. We need a green bond funding plan. We need to continue to retrofit, demand of the real estate industry, a green protocol for those buildings, especially during COVID. And then lastly, we've got 520 miles of shoreline in this city that needs a resiliency plan. It's great that this administration has a resiliency plan for Lower Manhattan and Wall Street, but we need a plan for Main Street. And if you've ever taken a day, and I suggest people try to do this, you get into a boat and you go look at the harbor of our city and realize how vulnerable we are to the next big storm that's not coming in 50 or 100 years, but is very likely to come here because of climate change over the next 10 years. So I am an environmental advocate. I've been an activist controller. I've been criticized for that. But I believe that if we're really going to help our children, we've got to leave them a planet that they also can thrive in. And the way to do that is by becoming the urban center of the green economy. I want to make a pledge to all of you today on climate change. I am not going to start my day talking about how we're going to be environmentally well by 2040 or 2050. These goals of 50 years from now is what's getting us in trouble with this administration. I'm going to do a yearly measure of our progress on climate change and climate economy. I'm going to speak truth to power on these issues, but we are going to continue the work I've done as controller.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Andy, for the question. Our next question comes from David Conliffe, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Community Alternatives. David, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Many nonprofits like CCA, Fortune, and Osborne favor borough-based jails with space for workforce development and other programs. How will you counter the fear-mongering that the Corrections Union and others have already launched?
Well, first of all, I was the first elected official in New York City that said close Rikers. That's right. People don't realize that. But I was one of the leaders working with so many of the advocates and activists. I've stayed on this as controller, looking at issues related to what's happening within Rikers, even with a smaller, under 5,000 population. We're seeing the average cost of incarceration at Rikers to be a $300,000 price tag, with more violence against inmates and correction officers. The Rikers model is done, and we must close it as soon as we can. And I've worked towards that goal for the last few years. In terms of the borough-based jails, this is where land use and zoning and the de Blasio administration clashed time and time again. In their rush to build the borough-based jails, they built them too big, and they didn't make cases to the community. And the truth of the matter is, as we decarcerate, the notion that we're going to need big jails is probably something in an ancient time. And we have to go back and think about the best ways we can have less jails, more services. And remember, I learned something as a young assembly member a generation ago when I was starting out. If you build the jail, they will fill the jail. So many Republican senators in the 90s waited all year in Albany to get approval to build a jail in upstate communities. They took Black and brown children mostly, shipped them upstate, not to reduce crime, but to simply create an economic model based on the jail and the prison. If you build the prison, you then build stores and you build an economy. Some of us said at the time, it's better to build schools and daycare centers and keep kids out of incarceration and away from the police. Based on the work I've done and my lifetime of work on this issue, we have to practice what we preach in city government. So let us look at ways to reduce jail space by reducing criminals and low-level drug offenses, and create a real one standard of justice that doesn't incarcerate, but actually educates and helps all of our children, especially in communities of color.
Thank you, Mr. Controller, and thank you for your thoughtful responses to our questions. You've heard about the critical issues in our community and across workforce development as a sector. but I'd like to give you a few minutes to make a closing statement and share with us anything you haven't already done.
Well, look, I want to just say to all of you, I'm actually a big optimist about this city. You know, we've seen the crisis come our way before, and I believe that we have the capacity in the new mayoral administration that speaks specifically about the challenges and the solutions to build a city that everyone can thrive in. No longer can we educate children based on zip code, and no longer can we police differently in neighborhoods. No longer can we only have housing for the rich with enclaves for the poor. We need a housing plan that represents the best values of this city. We need to build low-income housing. The government needs to do it. We've done it before, going back to Mayor LaGuardia. We can do it again. I've offered a specific housing plan to build the kind of housing that can move people from homelessness into housing, taking advantage of our city-owned property and land. So obviously, what I think I offer are serious solutions and a serious government record. I've conducted myself with integrity. I have never compromised this office. There will be no agents of the city in a Stringer administration. Those days are over. We're going to now govern the hell out of this city every day, agency by agency, because we owe our city the ultimate, and I mean the ultimate comeback from this pandemic. And I look forward to working with all of you, people I've worked with in the past. So Jose and Annie and everybody, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. As someone who's come before the nonprofit community many, many times, it's never a conversation based on fluff. It's always about specifics and drilling down. And that's what makes the leadership of the nonprofit community so special.
Thank you. And that concludes the fourth of our conversations with the 2021 candidates for New York City Mayor. A quick program note, please join us in 3 weeks from today on November 5th for the fifth of our Meet the 2021 Candidates for New York City Mayor. Excuse me. We'll be speaking with retired Brigadier General Lori Sutton, and our most recent addition to our series is Maya Wiley, who is scheduled to join us on November 19th. Stay tuned for the announcement of additional candidates in the coming weeks. Thank you all again for joining us this morning. And of course, thank you to the Comptroller for being here with us. And we wish you good luck with your candidacy.
Thank you. Thanks, Jose.
Enjoy the rest of your day.